welcome to another session of Collectibles Chaos. Today we thought we would take a deep dive on Donald Trump collectibles. Now that he's been reelected as president and going to be stepping into office again next month, or at least in January, it's really interesting to look at his collectibles history and his collectibles market currently. Because one thing we've noticed about Donald Trump, collectible-wise, in terms of autographs and other kinds of things, is he is extremely popular. If you think about the history of presidential autographs or political autographs, it's mostly miss, as in hit and miss. It's mostly miss. Most politicians, are not very collectible. They're not very popular. They don't have a lot of collectability. Now, there's, of course, some exceptions to that. If you go back in history, obviously the early presidents are very popular. They're very rare. They're hard to find. But you come to modern history, and I would say modern history would be, 1980 and on. Ronald Reagan, pretty popular, somewhat rare, not crazy rare, but somewhat rare. So, and he was kind of a conservative icon. And so some of his stuff is pretty popular, especially things that are written while he was president, or where he talked about something that was important, like communism or taking down the wall or trickle down economics, those kinds of things. But then you kind of go back before him, Jimmy Carter. Because he lived a long time, because he wrote a lot of books, his stuff is extremely cheap. Nixon, really cheap. Ford, really cheap. Bush, the first President Bush, really inexpensive, really easy to find. Clinton, easy to find, not very expensive. The second President Bush, again, not very expensive, a little bit more expensive than his dad, but still not overly expensive. Barack Obama, more expensive, again, pretty rare, not a lot of his autographs out there. And because he was the first black president, you have a lot of collectability around that. You have a different community that might collect him than normal. And so his stuff is relatively valuable. And then you go to somebody like Biden, who, again, been around a long time. There's a lot of his autographs, not very collectible. But then you have Trump, and Trump is in a whole different category for collectibles, meaning he has signed a ton of stuff, but it's still pretty valuable. And so what I thought I would do with this and just kind of take us back and say, all right, at least in the trading card world, where did his stuff start? And then what are we seeing now? Because, for those of you, I think you'd have to kind of be living under a rock to not know who Donald Trump is. But, before he was this politician, before he was this president, he was basically a businessman. And he built a real estate empire. Now, we can argue whether that empire was successful or not, but the fact of the matter is Donald Trump's a billionaire, and part of the reason he's a billionaire is because of his personality. He's just bombastic. He's out there. He's very much someone that's going to give you his opinion, and he doesn't have any filter, so he's going to say what he wants, and he doesn't really care whether you like it or not. Now, I remember Donald Trump from back in the 90s, and my first real memory of him, I'm in my 50s now, but my first real memory of him past, sort of this business icon that you hear of once in a while because you see a hotel or you see a casino, was when he was on Home Alone 2, back to New York, when Kevin went to New York and he got lost in New York City, relatively in the beginning of the movie, he goes to the hotel, to try and find a place to stay, and he's walking through the hotel. He runs into Donald Trump and he says, hey, where's the check-in? Where's the front desk? And Donald Trump stops and points him in that direction. That's the first time I remember Trump kind of becoming more of a cult of personality kind of guy versus just a business owner. And so even back then, he was signing stuff here and there. He was somewhat collectible in those days, but, he wasn't crazy collectible because he was kind of a business icon. And very, very few business icons become collectible. You look today, somebody like a Warren Buffett, very collectible, very valuable, but most of the other ones are not. Elon Musk is now becoming very collectible. Steve Jobs is very collectible because of who they are. They are innovators. They did things that changed our life and changed our society, or became, number one, or became, bigger than themselves, and that's how they became famous. But you go back in history, you think of a guy like Andrew Carnegie, who was the wealthiest and most powerful man of his time, and his stuff is not very expensive. J.P. Morgan, not very expensive. A little bit, but still you can find things of those people under $1,000, which in a historical collectibles market where those autographs don't really exist very much, that's relatively inexpensive. But then you look at Trump, and Trump, because he's been famous for so long, one of the things he started to do is he started to write books. And so if you're looking for early Trump autographs, the best place to go is books because he wrote a ton of books and frankly signed a fair amount of those. So if you're looking in the collectibles world and you look for a Donald Trump book, there's going to be a fair amount of books out there that he signed. And he signed them on the page. It wasn't a book plate. He didn't sign a bunch and then they peeled off a sticker and stuck it inside of a book. He actually signed the book. And as anybody should know, when you're dealing with modern day autographs, let's just do a little side note here. Watch out for fakes. Okay, there's a lot of fakes out there. So when you're buying this kind of stuff and you're going to spend hundreds or thousands of dollars on these kinds of autographs or these kinds of pieces, you have to make sure they are real. And some people specialize in that world and they kind of know what's real and what isn't. But of course, you have the major authenticators out there who, if you're going to buy an item and it's going to be fairly pricey, you want that thing to be already authenticated. So you're going to look for a BSA label or a Beckett. You're going to look at a JSA, which is James Spence Authentication, a very well-known, long history. You're going to look for PSA DNA authentication. You're going to look for Autograph COA. That's another group that again is well respected and known, and we're not worried that they're going to necessarily miss something. Now occasionally these companies do miss something, but on the modern day autographs I think they rarely miss those things. Sometimes they miss on the older stuff, but you're almost certainly going to feel good about your purchase if they have an authentication like that. So with Trump in his collectibles world, so back in the 90s, he's in Home Alone 2. People kind of see him. They're starting to get to know him. He's making a name for himself. But then what he really became famous for was a show called The Apprentice. And so Trump was hired or was pitched an idea, or he pitched an idea to the movie studio and said, hey, what if we do this show where I bring a bunch of people on and I put them through the ringer, and if the winner then gets to work for Trump, gets to work for me, gets to help build my empire. And again, remember, this guy at this point in his career, back in the early 2000s, billionaire status, well known. If you can't go to New York City and not see Trump something, Trump Tower. He had some casinos in Atlantic City. Eventually, those went bankrupt, and he went bankrupt on those. But still, Trump Tower. There's a Trump Tower in Chicago. There's a Trump Tower in D.C. So there's all these things with his name on it. Very well-known guy. So he comes out with this show called The Apprentice, and they bring in 10, 15 people, men and women, and they put them through the ringer to try and see who can win, and then they get to work for Donald Trump. Now, that's a pretty big deal, right? I mean, that's a chance to become a multimillionaire, perhaps. And so he does this Apprentice, and what he really becomes known about is that as these people go through this is like Survivor of the business world. As they go through this, and he comes to the end of an episode, he then says, "You're fired." And that became an iconic signature slogan across American entertainment. You're fired. And because of his personality, because of who he was, these folks then would leave the show, kind of like Survivor, except he's looking them in the face across a boardroom table and saying, "You're fired." And that show became a phenomenon. And it ran for several years with Trump and some of his team being involved in that process. And just getting rid of these people. So that then triggered the first autograph trading card that he had. So in 2005, a company called Comic Images, and although many have never heard of this company, they make a ton of entertainment-style trading cards. They came out with an Apprentice set, and inside, very limited, very rare, are a few Donald Trump autographed trading cards. You can find some on eBay. You can find some occasionally, not very many, probably less than 100. We don't know that for sure, but less than 100. They're not numbered. Again, you probably want to have that authenticated. That's his first trading card autograph. And of course, along the way, he's signing books, and if you see him in the street, he might sign something that way. Also, he's a big golfer, and so, you'll see some golf sign stuff. So that was kind of the first autograph for him. And then we don't see another trading card from Donald Trump again until 2011. And the 2011 Leaf Metal Friends of Ali set, so Friends of Muhammad Ali. Trump, again, not just an entertainment legend, not just a business legend, also friends with lots and lots of other famous people. And because he has casinos and because, those casinos typically will host boxing events, he gets to know Muhammad Ali, whether that's through some of the charitable work he's doing or through the business work he's doing or through the casino work he's doing. He meets and gets to know Muhammad Ali, becomes friends with Muhammad Ali, and signs these cards Leaf Metal Friends of Ali, or this Muhammad Ali set. And these are on card autos. Those 2005 cards were also on card autos. Those are his only on card autos. Okay, the rest are going to be, torn out of a book or on a sticker, those kinds of things where he didn't actually have the card in his hand. And so those are absolutely his most valuable cards. For whatever reason, the Apprentice card from 2005 is not as popular by any stretch as the 2011 Leaf Metal cards of Trump. And they go for thousands and thousands of dollars. You would think it's because it's his rookie card, first card with his autograph, but that's just not true. It was the Apprentice card from 2005, which is far more limited, I think, than those Ali cards. But this one's the big one. And they had the regular version, kind of that silver one, and they also had some gold versions. There's a super fractor of that card that's worth a ton of money, I'm sure. No, I don't think anybody has sold it, or at least I haven't been able to find anything where that was sold. But I know there's a person who has it. I've seen him talk on social media about it. He says at one time he was offered $250,000 for that 101 super fractor. I don't know if that's true, but it's still out there. And then Trump did another set in 2012, again with Leaf, and everybody has heard of this product that does trading cards, Pop Century. So this is the early days of Pop Century. Really, I think one of the iconic changes in the card community was that kind of set, which brought all of the Hollywood and sort of the non-sports figures into the trading card realm, where people could collect them, could buy a pack of cards and pull an autograph of someone famous that's not an athlete, on a regular basis with a large checklist. And we won't do a deep dive on Pop Century today because that is a different story, and I'd love to do that later. Maybe we'll try and get Brian Gray in here and talk about that. But that's an iconic set that started in that era. And Donald Trump had cards in that product as well, and they're valuable. Again, thousands of dollars, just not as popular as that Leaf Metal product the year before. So then, Trump is more on the national scene a little bit, but then really when he starts to enter the political scene is 2015. So 2015, 2014, but mainly 2015, he comes down the escalator of Trump Tower in New York City, where he then announces that he is running for president. And when that happened, that's when he became even more collectible, because he's not just some other candidate out there. This is a complete outsider. This is a guy that has no political experience, that has really nothing done in government other than maybe lobbying here and there for something he might want for his company or his casinos. And he gets on the stage and he just says, look, America's broken. I'm the guy who's going to fix it, and I'm going to tear apart all the institutions to do that. Nobody gave him any chance whatsoever. And the thing about Trump, he doesn't have a filter. He will get on a campaign stop or on the trail or in an interview, and he will say exactly what he thinks. And he does not care whether you like it or not. He does not care what special interest group you are. He doesn't care. He's going to say what he wants to say. He's going to say what he wants to believe. And screw you if you don't like it. That's just the way he is. And so, you know what happens when people do that in politics? He gets fired at from all sides. Every political side is shooting at him saying, you're crazy, you're nuts, whatever you're going to do is not going to work, this can't happen. Well, and nobody gives him a chance, right? Nobody says there's no way this guy is going to be able to break through the political world, and get to a point where he could possibly be elected president. Well, then he gets on the debate stage in 2016 and absolutely tears apart these other Republican candidates. Now, what's interesting about Trump, he didn't used to be a Republican. He was a Democrat. He's a big time Democrat, and he decided to run as a Republican because he was frustrated with how big government had got. And he was frustrated with kind of the liberal standard and all that good stuff. And we're not here to argue politics. Just understand, he used to be a Democrat. He ran as a Republican, so he doesn't have a lot of credibility inside of the Republican Party. He gets on the stage with these other guys like Jeb Bush, brother of the president, governor of Florida. He gets on there with Ted Cruz, this powerful senator from Texas. All these other candidates, and just absolutely demolishes them. Just, again, no filter, looks them right in the face, says you're an idiot. He just doesn't care what people think of his opinion. Well, his collectability after that exploded. Now people want him, not just because he's a business leader, not just because he had a famous television show, not because he knows famous people. They want him because this guy is saying things that nobody has ever said in a political spectrum, and people start to absolutely grab onto him. And so he's almost creating this political community, these raving fans that want to be, in his party and tear down the system and rebuild it again and America first and make America great again. These slogans and people get all fired up about it. So Leaf, they come out with a product in 2016 called Decision 2016, which is purely a political set. Now, Leaf has some history of doing other political sets. Again, not going to talk about that here, but they do this political set called Decision 16, and inside are all these trading cards of people that are famous in politics, running for president, both sides of the aisle, including some of the third parties. And so you can get these cards, and some of these cards are just regular cards. Some of these cards have manufactured patches on them that might be the American flag or whatever. They have other cards that have coins on them. They're pretty well done. But they also had cuts of Trump and other famous political figures. So other political figures that were running at that time period, you're also going to see cuts in there of all those candidates. And what, a company like Leap would do, rather than having to pay Donald Trump to sign, they just go out and they buy some of his old books, or they buy some of his old whatevers that have his autograph on it. They cut those out and then they put them inside of a card. So his 2016, they did two series, series 1, series 2. Series 1 had the Trump cut autographs in them. And that was a very, very popular card and still is. What does popular mean? Those are going roughly 2,500, 3,500, depending on what they are. And then in series 2, they did another series that year and again had Trump cuts in it. And those are relatively popular. Again, I would say very popular. When a card is worth more than $2,000, that's pretty darn popular. So again, cuts. So they're going out on the free market or going out on the market. They're buying a book. Maybe they're spending $200 or $300 in that book. They're cutting out that autograph. They're putting it on a card. You're pulling it out of a pack, and that card's now worth 10x, right? Or 10, 15x. So it's not worth $200. It's worth $2,000, $3,000. So 2016, he's in that Decision product. And now Trump, because he's so popular, he starts doing these massive rallies all over the country. So he'll, on the campaign trail, he'll do these massive rallies. He'll get tens of thousands of people to come. And because he's so famous now and he's doing all these things, people are always trying to get his autograph. And so if you go into the marketplace now, you're going to see signed hats, signed signs, signed books, really anything somebody can put in front of him, they're going to have him sign it. Another popular item, signed money. So think about getting a $20 bill and having Donald Trump sign it, or a $100 bill and getting Donald Trump to sign it. So to give you an example of how valuable those are, there's a $100 bill signed by Donald Trump, PSA 10, so they grade that autograph perfect. And that sold recently at RR Auctions, which stands for Remarkable Rarities, an auction house in Boston, that sold for over $5,000. And that's a pretty rare item, and it's pretty cool, right? Because it's on a $100 bill, and we're talking about the president, former president, current president, future president, this guy signing money. Money's always been a fairly popular thing to get signed by politicians and business leaders. But anyway, that's what those kinds of collectibles sell for. And so you'll have hats out there. For instance, on the screen, you'll see a red hat that says "Make America Great Again." Donald Trump signs that, on the bill. Hats like those, $2,500, $2,000 if they're authenticated and they're real. And it's usually a quick signature. So it's not one of his really nice signatures, even though his signature is kind of up and down lines. It's not crazy interesting, but it's unique. And that signature, depends on what he's doing, right? If you're catching him in a line and he's walking, it's going to be a quick signature. Versus if he's signing a book where they put a stack in front of him, it's going to be slower, it's going to be nicer. And then what's also interesting is, so he wins in 2016, he becomes president. Obviously, that's a big deal. That increases the number of collectors. Even if you don't like the president, even if you don't like him at all, there's a lot of people out there that just collect autographs of presidents. And so that increases collectability. It's kind of like in baseball or football or basketball when a player makes the Hall of Fame. Now you got a whole bunch of new collectors that come into that world and say, I got to complete my set. I got to get him. So he becomes president. Obviously, it's a pretty controversial 4 years. It includes the COVID process and all that fun. And kind of his personality. He runs for re-election and he loses. And then he tries to tear down the system again and say, I didn't lose fair and square. I lost because, there was cheating and there was all these things. And so then we have this crazy incident at the Capitol on January 6th. And so again, just makes him, what doesn't matter how you feel about that incident, makes him more of an iconic figure, whether you like him or not. And so he doesn't leave the limelight. He loses the re-election campaign. He doesn't lose the limelight. He's still collectible. He's still out there. And then he decides to run again. And so now he's coming back, and we've only had a president elected non consecutively one other time in the history of America. So Trump runs again, doing all these rallies, and now he's in a different political environment. Biden drops out because he does so poorly in a debate that he can't remember what day it is. He's having all kinds of trouble. We have the first time in the history of politics or the American system, political system, that someone was nominated for president that didn't go through a nominating process, didn't go through a primary process, was elevated to that process after Biden decided not to run again because his party forced him out. She goes to the convention, she gets all these people to vote. So the American people had really no say whatsoever in this person that is on the other ticket. And against Trump, who just lights into that process, gets people all fired up, and then he wins again. And so now he becomes president again, and you can imagine how collectible that is. Well, in between 2020 and 2024, what he started doing, because Trump's a businessman, he's an entrepreneur, he creates his own company to start selling collectible products. So this is unusual because presidents don't do this, right? You've got companies out there that'll maybe try to get a license so they can do those things. But Trump starts his own company and he starts publishing things that people can buy online, some of it autographed, some of it not. Well, what kinds of things? He's come out with sneakers. I'm not a sneaker collector, but that world is crazy, just like cards. It is a big deal to buy shoes. And so he created his own collectible shoes. He had regular shoes, he had gold shoes, and so those were really limited. He did watches. He did books. So he did these coffee table size, really big, thick, beautiful color pages books. And then he signed some of them. And so he would charge a premium to get those signed. So he's had 3 different coffee table books that inside have these large Donald Trump autographs that are really incredible if you're an autograph collector. They're dark, they're really well done. On some of the books, they're on a book plate. On some, they're just signed inside of the book. And you can buy those. And just to give you a flavor of what they cost, his latest coffee table book, which was after he almost got assassinated, there's another reason he jumped in collectability. The guy almost got killed and he survived. And not only did he survive, he got up off the ground within 30 seconds and was yelling, "Fight, fight, fight." I mean, that is something that's never happened. Somebody attempted to kill him. He gets right back up and says, you can't get me. I'm going to fight for this. And just so many things that have made Donald Trump this larger than life character. But he did these books, this coffee table book after the assassination, where he's on the cover and he's got his fist in the air. And those books, regularly, I don't remember what the regular price book was, but let's say it was $75. But if you wanted a signed version of that, again, not on a book plate, but in the book in a big autograph, $499, which sounds like a lot of money until you say, wait a minute, his autographs go for sometimes, a lot of times, over $1,000 or over $2,000. You can, if you're lucky enough, get in line online, get that book or get a few copies of that book, get that here, and then you can turn around and sell that book to someone else for a profit. And so he did that. So he did that with shoes. He did that with books. He did that with watches. He just came out in the last week with a signed guitar. And so now we're getting a little bit serious now about money here. The signed guitars were $10,000. They don't tell you on the website how much they cost, or excuse me, how many are made or how many he signs, because I don't think he knows how many he's going to sign. I think he signs to demand. So if he can sell 1,000 guitars for $10,000 a piece, he's going to sign them. Now, you could buy the regular guitar for a couple $1,000s, or you could buy the signed version. He had an acoustic guitar, an electric guitar. The electric guitar was a little bit more, but he had those out on his website doing that. So Trump is a larger than life political figure. He's got a massive audience of collectability. If you watch kind of the resales of all his autos, they really do incredibly well, even though there's a lot of them. I kind of compare him to Abe Lincoln, Babe Ruth, Taylor Swift. Lots of autographs. I mean, these are figures that are famous in history, but there's no shortage of their autographs, yet they still sell for thousands of dollars because the amount of people who want that autograph far exceed the supply. Supply and demand, just like anything else. So we're going to have some images, on this video that's going to show you some of these cards and some of these items. So you can see the variety of things that Donald Trump has out there that are signed. But wow, what a figure we're living and watching, and the collectibles market that surrounds him is really extraordinary and interesting. Thanks for listening. Please comment if you have any questions. questions about those things or you have any ideas, again, this wasn't meant to be a political post. I'm not saying you have to like or dislike Donald Trump. You just have to understand his market is really something to behold. Thanks. Have a great day. Press stop recording.